2024 gave us big gambling headlines. Record wins, a sports betting explosion, the Tropicana implosion, and a money laundering scandal at Resorts World. But one story that's sticking around as we enter 2025 is how casinos continue to put the squeeze on gamblers by quietly making the gambling odds even worse. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we revisit a talk with industry expert Scott Robin, a.k.a. Vital Vegas, who spills the secrets on all the ways Las Vegas hotels are manipulating the odds to favor the house. It's Tuesday, January 14th. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. All right, Scott, has Las Vegas become a bad deal for gamblers?
Well, it is a complicated question, of course. Probably 6 years late or 6 years into the conversation.
Better late than never if it's an important topic, which it is.
It is. I was going back through my blog post, and in 2016, I wrote a story about 000 roulette at the Venetian and how this was going to be the first step in what was inevitably going to be making games worse for players, blah, blah, blah. I've taken advantage of several waves related to this. Of every time there's a new outrage, 6 to 5 blackjack would be one of those. 000 roulette would be one of those. Kind of any change in the world of gambling, of course, is big news. These companies are for-profit companies. They, of course, are going to make their games as advantageous to themselves as possible.
Yes, the famous house edge.
Yes, the edge, and maybe some folks who listen to this podcast don't really know this, but the reason casinos win is they have a mathematical advantage over players. No matter what the game is, you almost never find a game that pays more than it takes in. People win all the time. It's a misconception that people always lose in Vegas. That's completely untrue. People win all the time.
But over time, science and statistics beat emotion and, I guess, feels that this time it's going to be the big hit.
Yes. And every time I sit down to play, this is the time. This is going to be the big one, no matter how much evidence I have to the contrary.
Scott, we do have some non-gamblers, I imagine, who listen to this podcast, and you've thrown around some terms. 000 roulette, 6-5 versus 3-2 on blackjack. What do those specifically mean? I mean, maybe in the bigger picture, what are those connotating?
Yeah, well, it's a way for the casino to give itself an additional bit of edge. But in roulette, in the old days, there was 0 roulette, which it's a fairly bad game, even with 1-0. Las Vegas really embraced 2 zeros. That's kind of American roulette. And Las Vegas roulette is 3 zeros. So for an uninitiated player, it seems like there's more spaces on the board, more ways to win. But actually, every zero gives the house 2% more advantage over an infinite number of spins. One of the other things you see are these side bets. Even in some traditional games like blackjack, you'll see side bets, which are fun when you win, but they're really absolutely terrible for players. They're really taking advantage of people who don't know the math. To me, the pivotal question in all this is not whether the games are getting better or worse. They're almost universally getting worse. But it's whether it matters and to whom it matters, because for the typical vacationer or recreational gambler, as they're called, they don't really care all that much about a 2% greater advantage on a table. What they really care about is a lower table minimum. So quite often in casinos now, you'll see 2 tables side by side, a roulette table with 2 zeros and a roulette table with 3 zeros. The one with 3 zeros has a $5 minimum. That means you can get in that game, $5. That table will often be packed when the other table that's more advantageous with a higher minimum, 10 or 15 or more minimum, that table will be empty. And that is because for somebody who's coming in and playing 20 minutes, they don't care. They're not going to leave their casino where they're staying or where they're eating or going to a show. They're not going to leave to go find a table that has a 2% better odds on that table. So the casinos, seeing this, know this, and why not put a terrible game like the Big Six wheel out in front where everybody can see it when they're coming in, and they're kind of bamboozled because they're in Vegas.
Yeah, and it's a big wheel. It's a giant big wheel.
And it's simple to understand. You put your money down. If it hits your number, you win. You don't have to learn strategy. There is no strategy to learn.
No.
You don't have to learn. You're not going to read a book about it. You're not trying to make your living from gambling. So the people who complain the most tend to be the people who gamble the most. They're very knowledgeable. Good for them. But they're still going to lose. It's still gambling. You just lose less.
over the period of time.
That's right.
So what I'm gathering, Scott, is that there's basically two groups of people very generically. The unsophisticated, we're just here to have fun, and then the advantage gambler. Is it fair to say that these advantage gamblers are kind of similar to the points travel obsessives out there, who only go to the airline or use the credit card that's going to give them the best? These are the gamblers that are maximizing every penny in the system?
That's exactly right. Everybody wants a value. There's nobody who doesn't want a value, but they're just willing to spend more time pursuing it. They are very focused on, if you find the right game and the casino is giving you perks, you can actually have an advantage over the casino. It might not be with that particular game, but in aggregate, all of the perks you get, the free play and the dining credits and the free room, you're winning in a way.
My dad used to have the same complaint. And it was right around the time that players' cards became a really big thing. He used to go in, play craps for, God knows, 2-3 days without a break, and know that no matter when he came in, whether he was busted or flush, that they would give him a comp to feed his family if he needed it. Then came the day when they said, well, you didn't play enough today, Meyer. Come back when you play at the levels that our analytics say we're going to give you. And that was way back when. That was over 20 years ago. So, has it just kept getting worse?
Well, it depends on who you ask, because the casinos it's getting better. And part of that is this kind of strange ongoing demand that nobody can really explain coming out of the pandemic, because fewer people have been gambling more and they have these record levels of revenue. You'll see this dynamic pricing where on a weekend, they're like, this building is full. We're actually going to give people a QR code rather than a menu. And then that way we can change the price on the weekends. So they're pushing it in every way. They have people whose full-time job it is to figure out efficiencies and to increase margins. And that goes from everything from housekeeping not being daily to just every aspect of every game. They're scrutinizing the game. They're scrutinizing the math. And I think there's a tipping point, but they haven't hit it yet. There's the pain point. I think there will be a quadruple roulette game, and I don't think it will matter, because the people playing it will not notice and not care, because the difference between 2 zeros and 4 zeros to them has no meaning at all.
So these are the masses, the people I'm calling the more unsophisticated gamblers. But then you do have these advantage gamblers. They're everywhere. They have a lot of blog posts and a lot of podcasts, and they're chattering all the time about how horrible the casino industry is coming. How important are these advantage gamblers to the casino's bottom line?
They are the worst customers. I found a website the other day of a service that does analytics to help casinos find their best customers, the best customers being the worst players.
Well, yeah, there you go.
Exactly. So they have an analytics system set up to find the worst players and to help casinos go, oh, that person may not be gambling a lot, but we're winning more from them. Let's send a deal to them.
So they have analytics that are not only adjusting these odds, adjusting promotions, but targeting bad gamblers to make sure they come in and bad gamble more.
Yes.
Well, I guess it all goes back to the question that started this conversation this time, which is, has Las Vegas, despite all the hyper analytics, created for itself a bad reputation when it comes to gambling odds? Are people starting to see Las Vegas as maybe not the value that it once was?
Yeah, I think that shift has been happening very gradually, but kind of very noticeably for probably 5 or 6 years. And that shift in perception of value has actually been reinforced by the heads of the casinos. The head of Caesars actually, during one earnings call, I believe, said they're pretty much focusing on the best players and pushing out the low-end visitor. When I heard those words being spoken out loud, I'm like, isn't that something everybody should just keep on the down low in the casino business? Like, why would you say that out loud? Because you have a lot of rooms to fill. And if you just were going for your highest tier players, you'd have a lot of empty rooms. But he said it, and I think it's been pretty obvious to people, especially people who watch Vegas and the deals and the comps. They're even taking away perks for their best players, because Caesars used to have these Laurel lounges that were amazing. I qualified for like 6 months or something. Pretzels and food and wings.
Pretzels, Scott, pretzels.
No kidding. Well, they were high quality pretzels, but it was like food. It was almost like a mini buffet.
Yeah.
Well, they took the Laurel lounges away. These are the best players. And they took that away because there was a hard cost. And we're talking about margins here. So we're seeing that chipping away. There's definitely a feeling that Vegas isn't the value that it was. To me, people are comparing it to 10 years and 20 years ago, which is absurd because the world has changed.
Sure.
Things cost a different amount. These companies are focused on return to their shareholders. So it makes sense to get the margins as high as they possibly can.
Well, on that point, and Scott, you also mentioned, record revenues year after year for the casinos. So in the short term, it does look like a lot of these measures, the odds adjustment, the promotion adjustments, et cetera, are turning big profits for the company. But I'm wondering your take on the long-term effects of this analytic-driven approach to gambling at casinos.
I believe it's cyclical. I think we're going to see, we've already seen visitation flattening a bit. I think it's going to happen even more. You mentioned legal gambling across the country. I think that was a turning point for Vegas. A lot of folks are just gambling in their backyard, so they just aren't necessarily making the trip. So as business flattens out, casinos have to start competing again, and then we're going to see some of these things rolling back. I don't know that the games will change back to being more advantageous, but we're going to start seeing more freebies and perks.
Let's hyper local focus then, because you do know what's going on in the Valley. Break it down for me, Scott. How does the Strip compare to downtown versus off-Strip for the gambler value that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting because locals are more discerning gamblers. So you will see a pretty good shift between the holds and the games themselves. It's not all that common to see a 000 roulette at a local's casino because a local will walk right on by. Those are some of the folks who notice those changes and notice the odds. And you'll never see a big six wheel at a local's casino. I mean, that's pretty telling. It's a different kind of customer. Those folks are, everybody's looking for a value, but that perspective is different because a local is there 3, 4, 5 times a week. There's fewer hijinks you can get away with. You also won't really see on the Strip like gravy boat giveaways or barbecue equipment being given away. It's just a very different mentality. So the gaming regulators, they keep an eye on these odds, and you can see a pretty clear breakdown. The 3 areas would be like the Boulder Strip. That tends to be the most advantageous for players. Downtown tends to be better on table games, but recently has actually been shown to have a higher hold on slot machines than the Las Vegas Strip, which was an astonishing turn of events. That had to do with the mix of games because there was a lot of video poker downtown. They started taking out video poker, which tends to be more advantageous for players, and they started putting in kind of more recent penny slots, which are better for the casino.
Yeah, the misnomer of penny slots, because I think there's nary a penny slot out there that doesn't cost at least 60, 75 cents a pull.
Yeah, nobody's putting a penny in a penny slot, and they're the worst for players. So you see a ton of them on the Strip. They are the big moneymaker for the Strip. Downtown, they took out those video poker machines and started putting in more of those machines. So at some point, it flip-flopped. That downtown on the slots is actually tighter than the Strip. But on table games, you'll still find better values downtown. At the Plaza, it's one of the few 0 roulette games on the main casino floor. You'll find them pretty commonly in high limit rooms, but at the plaza, they have the only one. And they use that as a marketing kind of selling point for that casino. And everybody who has 3-2 blackjack makes a big deal out of it, that it's not 6-5. Again, typical visitor doesn't care, but the people who know and who care and will make a decision on where they're going based on that, the casinos want people to know.
Yeah. So it sounds like for the high roller rooms or the high rollers, presumably, the advantage play isn't taking as drastic a hit as on the regular casino floor where the hoi polloi place their wagers.
That's right. Because if you talk about that small percentage on a single zero roulette, it makes a big difference if somebody's playing $5,000 a spin.
Sure.
On the casino floor in a typical casino, if somebody's betting $20, the only way to eke out any kind of real profit that pays for the dealer, pays a lot of these table games, because of the cost of labor, they just don't pencil out. That's why so many craps tables have changed over to these electronic table games, because the cost of dealers, quite often, you can't do a $5 table and make money. A few casinos have them, but it's almost like a loss leader to get people in the casino.
So, Scott, should we start sympathizing with the casinos? I mean, we just decried these penny-pinching practices, but you're telling me the casinos kind of have to do it to survive.
That is the case. These are big corporate entities. They have to keep their shareholders happy. And the flip side of this is they have to make money to pay for shiny new things. Those things don't just magically appear. So every dollar you donate to that casino is going to end up being something bright and sparkly and new. So that's the only way I can really rationalize losing so much money. I think over time, I do hear from a lot of people who say they're changing their visitation schedule from 6 times a year to 3. And it's basically because they can't afford to do it more. So does that help Vegas, hurt Vegas? I think it hurts long term. But these giant casinos, these corporate casinos, they have quarterly financials that they have to address. And they have to, Caesar sold the WSOP, a big brand for them.
Yeah, the World Series of Poker for people who don't know all the letters.
Right, World Series of Poker for $500 million.
Yeah.
It cost them almost nothing to do this because they get to keep hosting the event for 20 years. Well, the reason they sold is $500 million added to your bottom line for that quarter. In this case, would be $250. They get another $250 in 5 years, but that's a big boost to their bottom line. They have to make the shareholders happy, and that's not coming out of the pockets of players. So I love that because that means they can use that money to pay off debt. Vegas is stronger. Their company is stronger. So there's a lot of moving parts. And, there's self-interest. I would love to have single zero roulette tables all across the town, but that's just not practical. And casinos aren't some imagined just Neolithic thing. These are people. These are dealers. These are thousands of employees. So what's good for casinos is often good for the employees of those casinos, a huge part of our community, a huge part of the economic base of Las Vegas. So it's a complicated question.
Yeah.
Whether a 6-5 blackjack game, who is it hurting? Who is it helping? It's nuance.
Well, Scott Roeben, a.k.a. Vital Vegas, always a pleasure to get the unfiltered view on our city from you. Thanks for joining us on CityCast Vegas.
Thanks for having me back. I love being on.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, you should go tell a friend. Rate our show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. I promise you we are not changing the odds on the good news you get every single weekday. And we'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.
I'm not aware of places other than Las Vegas. There are other places.
They just don't exist, and you're like a flat earther when it comes to other states and gambling. There's like no other places.